So I'd like to begin by welcoming you all, including our presenters, Lauryn Oates and Kimmy Coseteng, as well as past President Patricia Leeson, who is actually also the president of our charitable organization, the Education Fund. I believe Sandra Cohen-Rose is also here, also past president. And we're also honored to have Ludovina Moreira, who is with the International Council of Women with us today. This program will be recorded, and I encourage everyone to share access to it with others in their councils and communities following the show. Oh, I have another person to admit, excuse me. I also, again, ask that you keep yourself muted. But before I formally introduce our presenters, I'm going to read our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the lands of Canada are home to many Indigenous communities who have held relationships with this land for generations. We thank them for sharing their land and water with us and recognize the historical and ongoing legacy of colonialism and the ill treatment on them over the years. We'll strive to make this acknowledgement a reality, not only in our words, but in our actions to address harm done in the past. I have to admit that I've been looking forward to today, and it's my pleasure now to formally introduce our guests. Lauryn Oates, PhD, is the Executive Director of Right to Learn Afghanistan, formerly known as the Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan. Sorry, she holds a BA Honors in International Development from McGill University, an MA in Human Security and Peace Building from Royal Roads University, and a PhD in Language and Literacy Education from the University of BC. Lauryn has worked with a variety of development organizations, multilateral agencies, and governments designing, planning, evaluating, or implementing programs in education and in gender equality, particularly in war-affected countries. She authored UNICEF's 2012 Afghanistan Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey and is the recipient of multiple awards and distinctions, including a Queen's Diamond Dual Leave Medal awarded by the province of British Columbia. And Kimmy Coseteng has more than 14 years of international nonprofit experience leading program management and expansion, public relations and advocacy, fundraising, governance, and organizational development. Before joining the nonprofit sector, Kimmy worked at Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer, leading government affairs, public policy, and health advocacy initiatives in the Asia-Pacific region. Kimmy has a Master of Arts in Leadership from Trinity Western University in Langley, BC, and is now a part-time instructor at the university. I have to say that we are very honored to have you with us as our guest speakers today on what is, in Montreal anyway, a wet September day. I think it's worth noting that the month of September opened with World Literacy Day on September 8th, I believe. And September and this week in particular has also shifted focus away from towards the ongoing and renewed attention to the UN as it celebrates its 80th anniversary, not to mention the critical meeting marking the 30 years since the adoption of the landmark Beijing Platform for Action, a visionary global agenda for the advancement of women's rights and gender equality, a vision that zeroes in on the power of education as a fundamental human right and a cornerstone for equality, development, and peace. And all this is a very good segue to this opportunity for us all to learn more about your organization's courageous work to advance education rights for Afghan women and girls. So welcome to you both, and over to you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me fine. I'm Lauren. You heard a little introduction of myself and my colleague Kimmy. We are with Right to Learn, formerly Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan, so you might know us better that way. And bonjour tout le monde. I'm going to do the presentation in English, but happy to take questions en français or in English. So what we're going to do is we're going to introduce you to our organization and a little bit of our history and what we're doing right now to respond to the situation. And I'll give a bit of context. There's been a lot happening lately. You've probably seen some of the headlines, so we can address some of what's going on and the state of restrictions. And then Kimmy's gonna talk about our advocacy agenda and some of the things we're working on and some of the developments in that area, which are, there's lots happening there as well. So go to the next slide. Yeah, so we'll start with a little bit about who we are. So we are propelled by the notion that human rights are universal and the right to education is for everyone, everywhere, and that it's our obligation to work towards that. And that is coming from a human rights perspective, but we also know that education and the education of girls and women is tied to literally every human development goal there is, from the health and welfare of children to wealth generation, to clean water, to economic development, and just everything across the board. So this is really, really an imperative, and nowhere is this right more compromised than in Afghanistan, which is the only country in the world that has actually formally, as a matter of policy and law, banned girls from studying at public secondary schools and at the higher education level. And that's just one of many, many restrictions in place in the country, with several new restrictions that have just come out in the past few weeks. So we work to restore that right to education as a matter of rights and to advocate for rights. So in the past, we worked in a few different areas. We worked in, when we first got going almost 30 years ago now, we were working in healthcare access and economic development and livelihood skills and education. But we really started to realize, and we were listening to Afghan women tell us, that their number one priority was education. And that's where we needed to put our efforts. And education would be the shortest path to human rights, and literacy was essential towards empowerment. So that makes lots of sense, and that's where we started investing our programming. So the programs you'll hear about, you'll notice, are all to do with education, and that's really where we've ended up specializing and focusing over the past couple of decades. And we know that the dividends are really high there, not only for empowerment and for women gaining a sense of agency and that sense of self-efficacy, that you can do anything with your life, but also the intergenerational impacts. To date, I have never met an educated individual who didn't also educate their children. So when you invest in women's literacy, you're passing that on through every subsequent generation of that woman. And then just huge development gains as a result of women and girls' education. So what's going on in Afghanistan is, hampering rights, but it's also holding the country's development back as well. So, there's the way we've kind of ended up interpreting what's going on in Afghanistan is that you have what are sometimes spoken about as different separate crises happening interchangeably, but we really see them as one and the same. So you'll sometimes hear it said, there is a humanitarian crisis. There's an emergency right now with food security and malnutrition rates skyrocketing, parents bringing in children on the brink of death to hospitals and feeding centers because they can't feed them. You have the majority of the population is food insecure. They don't know where their next meal is coming from. And sometimes people will sort of separate that from the human rights crisis and say, like, let's deal with the humanitarian issues. Let's not get into politics. But what's important to understand is this situation has been created by the political situation. This is literally a man-made crisis. This is a result of the Taliban's gender apartheid policies on the population, because it's restricted women's ability to earn income and feed their families. It's caused this huge displacement crisis where literally millions of people have left the country trying to get away from these policies, trying to live in a situation where their daughters can go to school, and where they have a chance at a better future. So these are one and the same crisis, and the solution will also be, the solution to the human rights crisis will also be the solution to the humanitarian crisis. So a bit of an overview of what's going on right now. So the Taliban seized power for the second time in history in August of 2021, after taking control of several provinces on their way to Kabul, and then they took over the government buildings. And within a month, they closed down girls' secondary schooling. So that gives you a sense of how much of a priority this was for them, how important it was for them to do that, since they did that immediately upon taking power. And then other restrictions started to come into other areas of education, like restrictions on primary education in some provinces. And a year later, they closed down universities. So women and girls were not allowed to attend any kind of higher education institution, with the exception that healthcare fields did remain open for women's training. So fields like nursing and medicine and midwifery. But those also were shut down just last year. So there was that last kind of loophole left open that women and girls could still study in, and that's now closed as well. For a while, private schools were still able to run secondary schooling programs for women and girls, but many of them were warned to stop doing that. So lots of those programs closed, though some continued to operate discreetly. And then the Taliban opened up madrasas, or seminary religious schools, for girls, and said they could attend those. But often, what we're learning is that that's by no means equivalent to a proper education where you get to study all subjects, and that it's a means to upward mobility. And then just a host of rules that impact daily life, that are the so-called morality rules about women being required to have a chaperone with them when they leave their home, if they try to travel, how they dress, what they're able to do in public spaces. And these, I won't go through them. There's literally more than 100 of these restrictions that have now been codified. They've been made into law, but they have the impact of just relegating women and girls to the private sphere. They're stuck at home. Even just going out your door, you're faced with all of these restrictions. And then most recently, you may have seen the headlines recently that new restrictions came into effect on the higher education curriculum, which included banning hundreds of books. And it happened that a good number of those books were books written by women. And the authorities acknowledged that that is one of the rules, that they are banning any book on any subject that's written by a woman, in addition to books by foreigners and books on various topics that they don't like. But they banned books by women, as well as shut down a dozen or so courses on subjects that they didn't like, that again also often had to do with women. And then you've also probably heard the news about the internet restrictions that started last week. That's a fast developing story. There is a lot of internal dissent within the Taliban against that, because the Taliban also use the internet. And of course, and every government institution relies on internet. Industry relies on it, commerce. So it's been incredibly disruptive to day-to-day life. So there's quite a bit of pushback, and it remains to be seen sort of how that's going to get worked out, if it will be reversed or not. But as it stands right now, there is at least 6 provinces where fiber optic internet is not functional at this time. And it's impacted in as many as 13 provinces. And it may become countrywide. It may start to affect mobile data, or it may not, and it may get pulled back. At this time, mobile-based internet still works, so people are using that, but it's not as convenient as fiber optic. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. And all of this, as I said, has this impact on, it has such a high human cost for girls and women, but also for the whole population. It's dragging down the country's economy, its GDP, it's increasing child mortality rates, and human lifespans, and just all these very practical consequences. But what we're seeing is that there is no price too high in the eyes of the Taliban leadership in Kandahar. So you see a quote there from the so-called supreme leader of the Taliban. And he's just largely completely insensitive to any of the pushback to these policies, either from Afghans or from the international community. So I expect that there will, be even more restrictions, because they're just not concerned about any of the criticism, including criticism that comes from other Muslim majority countries against what the Taliban are doing. What they're doing is just such an outlier in the world. Next slide. Okay, so what are we doing in response to this? So, fortunately, in August 2021, when the political situation changed so dramatically, we had programs that were already in place that were helpful in responding to this, and we added to those new initiatives so that we could be responsive to the crisis that people were in. So one of our programs that proved to be very relevant was at that time called Technology for Education. Now we call it Directed Anesh Academy, and Directed Anesh means knowledge tree. And this is a kind of online school that has three branches, if you like. So we have the metaphor of a tree, and our oldest branch is the Directed Anesh or DD library. And we opened that after a couple of years working hard on it in the background. It launched to the public in 2014. So it's been around for more than a decade. And today it has more than 8,000 learning materials in 9 languages. So these include the languages of Dari and Pashto, the 2 official languages of Afghanistan, plus English, plus 6 minority languages spoken in Afghanistan. And people can go and use any of our materials for free. They include video lessons, audiobooks, children's storybooks, science subjects, just a huge range of educational materials. And it's very, very well used. So you can see the stats there. In a typical month period, we can have more than 100,000 people who are downloading our materials and using them independently. The second branch of the tree is called Directed Anesh courses. And these are full courses that you can take at your own pace. So if you've ever used Coursera or EDX or a platform like that that has like instructorless courses, it's like that, but for Afghans. So people can choose to sign up for a course and take that course in Dari or Farsi or Pashto or English. And then enroll it, and they can get a certificate at the end. And some of those courses we've developed in partnership with universities. And so our students like that when they can get a certificate from a known university. And then finally, the youngest branch on our tree is DD Classroom. And this is a online high school. It's a fully operational school that functions, much like any high school you're familiar with. Students are attending 5 days a week for 6 hours a day, and they get a internationally recognized diploma upon graduation, which is actually issued by the province of Ontario, because you cannot get a high school diploma if you're a girl in Afghanistan anymore. So our students study a hybrid curriculum where they learn both the Afghan curriculum and then they transition to the Ontario curriculum by the 10th grade so that they can earn that credential. So we opened this school in 2022 with one class of grade 7 students. And today we are up to around 700 enrolled. And by the end of this year, we will have 1,000 students enrolled, because every year we have to add a grade as we have more grade 7s come in and the other kids go up to their grade. So our first cohort from 2022, who were 7th graders, are now in the 10th grade, and they're going to move into grade 11 soon. So our school grows that way. So this is just an example of a program that responded to the situation from 2021. Next slide. So a couple of other programs. We have a grants and scholarship program, and the sort of signature initiative in this program is called the Shafia Education Access Fund. And that, again, has been something running for many years. It's been around since 2011, but it's changed its scope in response to the crisis in the country. And we have huge demand on this fund. So from January 1st up to the end of August, so I'm about a month behind in the stats, but that's the up-to-date stats we have. If you combine the number of individual applications we received to this fund and group applications, they represent more than 22,000 individuals who are asking for things like devices so that they can study online, internet data packages, tuition, sometimes books, materials, transportation costs, whatever costs they face that are standing between them and accessing higher education. Um, and we do some other programming in partnership with partners. For instance, we've worked with Arizona State University, who they run English learning courses, and we've been able to facilitate Afghan women's access to those courses at no cost. And they use those courses often to um, like bridging to get their qualifications up so that they're eligible to apply for universities abroad, for instance. So we'll go to the next slide. In Canada, we work as well. So our engagement and advocacy program does a number of things. You'll hear more about it from Kimmy, but briefly, we have chapters in 9 communities, and those are led by volunteers, driven by volunteers. They sometimes raise funds for our program, they raise awareness, and they work on our advocacy agenda and advocating for the right to education. Um, and calling for the codification of gender apartheid. And then a very new program for us is Safe Harbor, and that's the work we do in resettling Afghans who are with a priority on women and women-headed households who are in danger and are trying to get somewhere safe where it's too dangerous for them to return to Afghanistan. So to date in that program, we've been able to support 122 people to come to Canada. We have 60 who are in progress. I just saw this morning one of them just got issued her visa. So she'll be heading this way imminently, which is really, really exciting. So that's an example of some of the work that we do in Canada. So the impact of these efforts, prior to the political change in Afghanistan, we did a lot of work training teachers, and we were able to train more than 10,000 teachers who were able to get certified and work in public schools and support girls' access to education. We've continued our teacher professional development work online, and we also work with teachers and school leaders who are exiled and are working with refugee communities in Pakistan. So I won't say much more about that project, but you can find information online about the work that we're doing in places like Pakistan and Turkey. We did a lot of work equipping schools with learning materials. So we would put science labs in schools, we would set up school libraries, and we've also continued to do that work in displaced communities in Turkey and Pakistan. But we now distribute learning materials directly to households to support learning at home, since the schools are closed to girls, through a program we call Learning Baskets. I mentioned the Shafia Education Access Fund and how many applications we've received this year. The number of awards that we've been able to issue exceeds 4,000. And that helps young women and women of all ages access university, online training programs, bridging and language programs, and just a huge variety of educational opportunities. And it's just a very practical way that we can support their access to education. I shared a little bit about our library, and you can look at the library yourself. I'll put the link in the chat shortly, so you can have a browse. And yeah, we are anticipating having 1,000 students in our high school program by the end of this year. So I wanted to share a little bit, some words from a young woman that we've been able to support. So you hear directly from her what she says, and this is a letter from a young woman named Tahara, who was 15 when she wrote this, and she's a displaced person living in Pakistan, and she's imploring us to not turn away from her, to listen to her words and remember her rights. She says, "We want the world to hear us, see us, and feel us. We don't want to be humiliated or ignored. We are not dead in a corner. We are still alive with our hopes and dreams." And I have her letter on my wall. I read it every day. And, you know, I think we try to keep these messages in our minds all the time as we work to run these programs and to try to scale these programs so that we can reach more young women like Tahara. So here's a testimonial from one of our scholarship fund recipients. So this young woman was able to enroll in a university in India. And this gives you an idea of, you know, where people are studying. So in this program, they actually have to be enrolled or accepted into a program when they apply. So they're finding programs on their own. And they can be online universities. Sometimes they're going in person. We've paid for a lot of plane tickets. We had a student recently go to Armenia to study. We've had them go to Kyrgyzstan. We've supported a student at Columbia University in New York, one in Australia and England. But often they are in the region studying at universities in Bangladesh, Turkey, Pakistan, and other countries. Next slide. And another testimonial from a Shafia Education Access recipient. And through the applications, and I'm on the committee that reviews the applications, and we read them every day, or else we fall terribly behind. We hear the stories. We hear the just incredible resourcefulness of how women and girls are navigating the situation and not giving up and just finding ways. And they're so driven to have their education back in their hands. So in this testimonial, you hear about a mom borrowing money to pay a fee, you know, to be able to pay the tuition. And we get to hear those incredibly inspirational stories every day of how women and girls are fighting back. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Kimmy to tell you a little bit about our advocacy work and some of what's going on in that area.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauryn. So I'm mindful of time, but I will run through some of the slides real quick. Lauryn already talked a little bit about our work in advocacy and gender apartheid. This is one of the things that I personally am focused on. First, I wanted to say thank you to NCWC, some of the members who've guided me through to putting together a parallel event at the last CSW in New York in March. So we're grateful for that. We are, I don't have to explain what gender apartheid is to this group. It's like preaching to the choir, but this is basically what, as Lauryn mentioned, the right to education is not just about that, right? So it's about a lot of big things. And what's happening in Afghanistan is a systemic gender-based oppression and domination, which is, what we see as gender apartheid, where women are practically being erased from society. And we felt that, this is something that we need to be a part of. This is a discussion that we need to lead and advocate for. As Lauryn mentioned, there's over 150 edicts that have been issued by the Taliban related to the suppression of the rights of women and girls. So they basically can't go to work. Some women who were running salons in their homes were raided and were arrested this last couple of weeks. So they pretty much can't do anything, right? They can't walk out of their homes. They can't have coffee with their friends. They can't, bring their daughters out to school and all that. So there's a lot of restrictions. And we've seen recently, there were a couple of earthquakes that affected Afghanistan, and most of the people that were not rescued were actually women, because there was a restriction on men rescuing women or women humanitarian aid workers who couldn't come into the country and help. Right, so there was a lot of women have died during the last couple of earthquakes that happened in the last month or so. So what do we want to do? We basically want to make the Taliban accountable to whatever they're doing in the country, which is basically codification, turning it into a law that whatever they're doing against women is illegal, and we want them to be accountable for what they've done. What's great about this movement is that this is not just us working. There's a lot of people, a lot of women's rights activists, human rights defenders around the world who have come together and have supported this global movement. So there's a lot of pressure coming from different parts of the world, talking to different governments and other decision makers to get this done, basically, right? So we there are laws against gender persecution, but this is not the same as gender apartheid. So gender apartheid is much bigger because it's institutionalized, and this is something that we want to make sure this language is recognized and codified, right? So Lauryn talked a little bit about what's happening around the world in this space. So this is the International Court of Justice, where Canada was one of the countries that initiated an adjudication process through the International Court of Justice to hold the Taliban in violation of CEDAW in the form of systemic human rights abuses against Afghan women and girls. So this is an historic move supported by over 20 countries. Right now, this happened in September last year. It's been 6 months. So right now, our understanding is that it's not publicly available. The information is not publicly available, but there are negotiations that are ongoing among the parties. And what we'd like to do here is that we'd like to be updated with the process so that we know, what was the status, what's happening, and how can we facilitate this process? How can we move the needle on this process? Within the United Nations, also last year in November, the UN's Legal Committee advanced discussions for an international convention on the prevention and punishment of crimes against humanity. And our goal as advocates is to ensure that states actually contribute to this draft and indicate that gender apartheid as a crime against humanity. So in terms of next steps, we're hoping that different countries will provide their input. The next committee meeting is in January 2026. So right now, a lot of advocates and human rights defenders are working towards making sure that the countries that they live in or the countries they're working with are able to contribute to this draft. And then most recently, with the International Criminal Court, in November, there were 6 state parties who refer the worsening human rights situation to the ICC. And so in early this year, there was an application for arrest warrants for 2 senior Taliban officials, and these warrants were issued in July 2025. So this is, it's in a lot of a sense, this is really symbolic. It means that, the ICC is looking at these issues. We don't know if things will happen or if they will get arrested. We know that, in previous ICC cases where arrest warrants have been issued, the only time they're able to capture or arrest some of these very powerful people are when they're traveling. And we know that these 2 senior Taliban officials don't really travel. So hopefully there's a way to get this done, but it sends a strong message that the ICC and the international community are watching and that we want things to happen in the foreseeable future so that Afghan women and girls can get their lives back. All right. Most recently, also, we tabled a petition at Parliament. It was read by Elizabeth May last June 16, which basically what we're asking for is for Canada to publicly declare support of gender apartheid as a crime against humanity, and a few other things. So this was tabled in June 16, and shortly after that, the Parliament took a break. So we're hoping for a response. Now that they're back in sessions just over the last couple of weeks, we're hoping we should be receiving a response from the Canadian government in terms of what we've asked for in this petition. What's next? So we're really, there's a lot of momentum going on, and we don't want to lose this momentum. So we're working with a lot of other organizations, other human rights activists to make sure that the pressure, we don't drop the ball on this. We're drafting a lot of policy papers, different things that we want to make sure that our advocates around the world or people we're working with are putting pressure within their governments as well or within the public, so that things will move. Because we really need to make sure that the Taliban is held accountable for the actions that they've done over this past few years. I just wanted to end my presentation with some resources that I wanted to share, and I'll share some of the links later on. But we have developed a few resources. It's up on our website. So if you go to the Right to Learn website, you'll see gender apartheid there in one of the drop-down menus, and we created some fact sheets. Fact sheets are available in English and in Farsi. We've created a toolkit We have curated some resources that other credible organizations have put together. So anybody who is an advocate, an activist, or who wants to be part of this conversation, they can download these materials and use it in their own advocacy programs. We also have other fact sheets that's related to Afghanistan, what's happening in the country in terms of maternal and child health and other elements, like working in business and higher education and all that. So these are very easy to read fact sheets if you want to know more about what's happening in the country. Lauryn mentioned our Darakti Dinesh Academy. If you go to the website, I'll share the links later. We do have the DD courses. We've created a course on advocacy to stop gender apartheid. So it's a self-paced course. It's in English, Dari and Pashto. You can log in and take it at your own time. We had about 40 or 50 people who've taken the courses, and it's a mix. It's great to see a mix of different people. Some of them are young Afghans, and some of them are people from different countries who are just really interested in this course. Here, I'll stop there. I hope to give you more time for questions. I know there's a lot of things going on and we've shared a lot this morning or this afternoon, but we're grateful to be here and we want to thank you for this opportunity to share more about what we're doing and what needs to be done in Afghanistan.
Wow. I'm sure everybody is quite stunned at this point. But it is the time for questions. So if you want to raise your hand or use raise your hand either physically or using one of the little tools at the bottom, I'm more than happy to direct questions to our very esteemed guests. Do we have any specific questions? Linda, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, just doing that, finding everything here. I wondered with the work in Afghanistan, with the fact that they can't, it's illegal to go to school and they're pressing down on them. I just wondered how difficult it is for you to organize these things, get this material to people, like who's helping you? How does that work? How does that impede you as well?
Yeah, I can take that question. I mean, well, we're working with Afghans, of course, and we worked for a long time in the country, on the ground, implementing our own programs. So that work continues, but in a very different way from prior to 2021. And we work with partners as well. But for instance, with the Shafia Education Access Fund, we procure the items directly. So unless it's tuition or something, we tend not to give cash. We give the computer. So we're purchasing the computers, tablets, cell phones, other hardware, data packages in the country and distributing them to beneficiaries in the country. And yeah, how we work, I mean, we require just a lot of talent within the organization. We're a very human capital centric, we have less like physical assets and more it's our talent. So Afghans who can code, and because of our programs being largely online, we need lots of technical expertise to be able to run those programs. And then the other thing we do is we adapt. So with events last week, we simply adapt and continue to deliver, but always in changing ways. So we have to remain very, very nimble as the situation in the country changes. But we rely to a great extent on just working with Afghans, hearing what their needs are, and then finding ways to deliver. And I should also mention, we're part of a network of organizations called the Alliance for the Education of Women in Afghanistan. And there's more than 100 member organizations. And so we all talk to each other, we coordinate, we cooperate, sometimes we partner on things, we share information. So that's a great way, for instance, with what was going on last week with the internet ban, just to be able to see, what are others' experiences, how are others responding to this problem, and exchanging strategies and innovations with each other.
Thank you. Just my last question was, recognizing Afghanistan, I just heard something on the news last week and I didn't get the full impact of it, but I wondered how, is that something you're trying to get governments to not recognize Afghanistan? Because what is the impact of that if governments do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we definitely do not want to see the formal recognition of Afghanistan. And this is actually something that's very motivating to the Taliban. They want global recognition. And they just started to get it with Russia's being the first country to formally recognize their regime. And that's a potentially very dangerous precedent. And even though Russia is the only country to recognize them. And of course, it's Russia, right? It's not a state that's known for its like upstanding, moral diplomacy. But they just practically have engagement with a lot of states. And this is something that we've criticized, and we've asked states like Canada to respond to those states that are effectively enabling the Taliban. I'll share some links to some op-eds that we've published recently on this very issue.
Thank you. In relation to resources, and we have 2 or 3 more people with questions. We will be posting those on the National Council of Women's website. We have a new section called resources and books and resources. So I think it'll be helpful. But thank you, Kimmy, for putting those in the chat here. And it'll also be included in our next newsletter. But I'd like to now pass it over to Linda McDonald. Please, do you want to unmute yourself, Linda? Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Fantastic work, Kimmy and Lauren. It's really very moving. Always makes me proud to know that I'm Canadian. What I wanted to know is when you're doing education, I'm thinking of the young girls that are going to school and getting educated, but I don't imagine they're getting any education about patriarchy and misogyny and what's happening to them socially. So because I know that really if children understand the reality that they're living or being forced to live, especially girls in Afghanistan, that knowing it's not your fault really prevents a lot of the trauma and the victimization that they feel. So is that part of, do you have educational packets on the violence against women and girls in Afghanistan and in the patriarchy? It's my question, and misogyny.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely part of our curriculum. And we just generally have a focus on agency, right? Like yeah, sort of your own and critical thinking. And we also address this in our teacher professional development. So we have a course on gender equity in education systems, and our teachers, all of them take that as part of their onboarding. And you can actually take the course yourself or browse it if you're interested. It's free and open on our DD courses site. We have a course on critical thinking as well that our teachers take, and it addresses topics like that. And we also offer mental health support to our students. So we employ 2 Afghan women counselors who are very busy. They do both one-on-one sessions and group sessions and sort of education on psychology to support the students to just be resilient against the conditions in which they're living. And yeah, this is a theme you'll find in many of these online school programs with other organizations as well, because it's just a necessity for this context.
Yeah, the feminist analysis is really important for young girls everywhere, but especially girls in countries such as Afghanistan. Thank you.
And now I'd like to ask Carol Shepherd to put forward her question. Thank you, Carol.
Hi, yeah, I already said in the chat that I really appreciated your presentations, Kimmy and Lauren. Really, you communicated a lot of information in a short period of time, and I really appreciated it. I have so many questions, but I'll try and restrict myself. You mentioned that your work in Afghanistan is done obviously with the cooperation of Afghans, and I'm still not clear, and I'm conscious that this is being recorded, so you may not want to go into any great detail, but I'm assuming there's a high degree of risk for the people on the ground in Afghanistan who are managing to get computers and arrange for connectivity for the women who are receiving the computers. Is that the case?
Yeah, you're right on both counts. We're limited in what we can say, though we can say a lot more here than we might like in public or in on a website. And you're right that there's risk as well. So we pay a lot of attention to risk management, and our overall approach is, we tolerate some risk, but we stay and deliver. Like, we're going to keep running our programs. We're going to find a way to respond to need despite the risk. And so, in terms of like protecting everybody's privacy and data, and our program participants, teachers, colleagues, that's our number one priority. At the same time, we have one of the risks that we acknowledge is the risk of not having an education. And we hear from so many girls and women about the mental health impacts on them, who they're suffering from depression, from anxiety, suicidal thoughts. There's many documented cases of girls and women who have actually committed suicide because of losing access to education. So that's a risk we manage as well, that we need to provide education, but we have to try to do it in the safest possible way. And again, this is where being part of a community of organizations is really valuable, where we're able to interact with other organizations doing similar work and share best practice. So in the Alliance's capacity building efforts, this is a common theme: the risk management, cybersecurity, and then just in the kind of informal exchange of information as well. But you just have to be really on top of it. The situation changes so often. I should point out that online education is not illegal in Afghanistan. It has not been banned by the Taliban, including even formal secondary programs. But we don't assume that that's always going to stay the case, and we still operate with a lot of discretion and security top of mind.
Okay, we have one more question. Thank you for your question, Carol. Now passing it over to Gracia. Can you unmute yourself, please? Thank you.
I have indeed. This is an amazing group, an amazing presentation. It made me think back to a young woman who came to our National Council of Women meeting in Ottawa. Her father was with her, I think, at that time, and we were raising some money as well to help out. And she was at great risk. That's why her father was most worried about her, because she was setting up the learning centers in libraries and schools and things like that. After that, many years after, I'm pretty old, and I was listening to Cross Country Checkup, and somebody from the Red Cross was talking. This is after the Taliban were defeated, and he indicated that yes, I mean, terrific progress, people being elected to Parliament, etc. But in the outer risk, in the rural areas, it was just not the same thing at all. It was, they weren't getting the benefit of that. So you've pulled it a lot further, and I hate to say it, A1 and internet and all of that is extremely helpful. But do you still find maybe a gap in the line for the people, the young women in the rural areas?
Yes, that was a problem that sort of pre-exists the Taliban period now, and is still and I think has intensified. So certainly, in our own programs, we definitely see more representation from girls and women who live in urban areas, simply because of infrastructure, and also just that concentration of, like, if your neighbors are doing this thing, it's easier for you to do it as well. So it's really, really tricky, especially with virtual education programs, to reach the really rural areas. And I know that that's a challenge that virtually every organization working in this field is facing and trying to work around, but it's hard. Yeah. But we are focused on it, and we try hard to have as diverse of representation as we can, in terms of like the number of provinces represented, and ethnic groups, and people from poorer backgrounds, for instance.
Well, we're getting close to the top of the hour, and it's clear to all of us how important your work is. I'd like to pass it over now to Linda Serpone to thank you.
Okay. Well, it's easy. I have been following this group for a number of years, and I have always been impressed by this group. I have very few groups have the range, I mean, the breadth and range that you have, the people you manage to reach, and the resilience you show when things change on a dime has been amazing. I agree with you that education is really important. I see your point, and I thank you for all the girls' lives you probably have saved by getting them this education, because I know from Afghani girls that I've talked to what a difference that makes. It really is life-saving. I hope I'm looking forward to following up the petition. There's so many things, Penny. I hope when you send out your message to everybody for attending, you will include all the stuff that's been put in the chat and
Definitely.
actions that we can take to help, because I would ask all of you to follow this wonderful group and to help them in any way you can. So if there are petitions, if there's news coming out, well, I'm sure that the national right will keep us informed of anything that's going on. So once again, Kimmy and Lauryn, thank you very much for your wonderful, wonderful talk and wonderful work.
I invite everybody to unmute themselves and clap.
Thanks so much for having us.
Oh, it's our pleasure, most definitely. Thank you so, so much.